Sun Tzu's The Art of War is in the tradition of, or the school of thought that we call realism. And realism, as a more general term, encompasses views about human nature, about what constitutes good leadership, about the state, about the use of force, about the place of morality in politics and in warfare. And so Sun Tzu in general fits mainly within the general category of realism. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about that general category of realism. Of course, realism is opposed to idealism. If you've listened to any of my videos on Plato or St. Thomas More or any other number of thinkers like them, you'll be able to see the contrast pretty fast between thinkers like that and somebody like Sun Tzu or Machiavelli or Thomas Hobbes. Idealists tend to think of human nature as made for goodness. We don't want to say naturally or automatically good, as though, human beings are basically good and somehow they go astray because of some terrible accidental evil force or something like that. That's not an idealistic perspective necessarily. But idealists do think that human beings are built for goodness, and that really the role of leadership and government and laws and all of these things that structure our lives should be about helping us to become what we were built to be, which will then make us happy. And what we're built to be is basically good beings who cooperate with each other, who care about each other, who are productive in a very a cooperative way, in a very moral way. Whereas the realist sees human nature as not basically good, but basically, I hate to say it, but basically bad. In that they basically, a realist would say, if we look at the behavior of most human beings most of the time, we will find that they think in terms not of the moral common good, but of their own self-interest. And when they're confronted with a threat, they will look to protect and defend themselves. And so from that point of view, leadership becomes something different. It becomes not a guide for people to become better morally, as a role model, as a lawgiver, but rather somebody who will protect and defend the good things that a particular people has, such as their land, their wealth, their very lives, right? So leadership in that respect is much more about the self-interest of the people within the state, and therefore the state itself becomes something different. It becomes an entity which is there to protect and defend certain interests against all comers, and the realist tends to think that the world is full of comers, basically. They're full of people and entities who are out to get what other people have. And so the realist will say, you'd better be smart, because the situation dictates that you arm yourself and you think 2 or 3 or 4 or more steps ahead, because everybody else in your area is thinking about how to take advantage of you. So you better start thinking about how to do that first. So the realist thinks in terms of preemption, because the assumption is that the other people or entities are basically going to be aggressive. at any moment. So you can see there's a big difference between the idealist, like Plato, and the realist, like Sun Tzu. And so, as I mentioned in another video, Sun Tzu lived during a time of a lot of conflict, and in which China was becoming, it was very divided, but the powers in China were consolidating, and there was an awful lot of heavily armed combat, and it didn't pay to obey moral rules, so they had a clash with the old idealistic perspective. And so a lot of the advice in The Art of War deals with how you have to let go of your moral rules in order to be able to see the way to victory. And maybe even more importantly, you have to let go of your own idealistic self-conception as a leader in particular. Because leaders tend to think that glory is important. Glory and honor are in a middle ground between idealism and realism, you might say. But glory and honor are more illustrious, more illuminating than mere self-interest. And somebody like Sun Tzu says, we cannot concern ourselves with honor and glory because those things will make us do things that will put us in a vulnerable position. So over and over again in The Art of War, Sun Tzu reminds the general or the leader that this isn't about him displaying himself and his abilities. It's not about the big dramatic victory. Sun Tzu says that the best way to win a battle is to never fight it, to find some way to get your objective, to obtain your objective without fighting. Or if you can't do that, the second best way is to fight as little as possible, to use as few of your resources as possible, even if it means waiting, even if it means faking retreat or faking weakness. And he goes into great lengths about, appearing to be weak in order to be strong. So this is very difficult for most people. Sun Tzu's famous for saying, know yourself. Know your enemy, yes, but more importantly, know yourself. And this is because you have to understand your own strengths and weaknesses. Most people do not want to admit they have any weaknesses. And he's basically saying you have to know yourself well enough to be able to have the self-control, the mastery of yourself, necessary to do whatever it takes to win, even if that is appearing to be weak, in order to take advantage of your enemy's basically lulled senses, right? Take advantage of your enemy thinking that you are in retreat, that you are weak and cannot fight back, so that you can choose the moment and time when you attack. So difficult is this because of our sense of pride, that Sun Tzu just hammers away at this all the time. He says in chapter 1, if your enemies have advantage, bait them. If they are confused, capture them. If they are numerous, prepare for them. If they are strong, avoid them. If they are angry, disturb them. If they are humble, make them haughty. If they are relaxed, toil them. If they are united, separate them. Attack where your enemies are not prepared. Go to where they do not expect. Well, this way of thinking is the exact opposite of the typical old Western way of thinking of the mighty, an open clash of wills between two equal opponents. And in some of this advice, there seems to be a sort of strange, ignoble character in a way. In that, Sun Tzu is not interested in whether the fight is equal. He's interested in winning. Well, this is the essence of realism. The realist says to any leader, if you do not put winning first, then what's the point in having morality? But if you're a leader, you're responsible for many other people, whether it's many citizens or whether it's many soldiers. And so if you do not put their lives first and do what it takes to save them so that you can win, then how do you achieve any other good? So this is the realist's ultimate answer to the idealist. If you're dead, how can you be good? And the realists insist that the environment that we're placed in makes it impossible for a leader in particular, since he's responsible for thousands if not millions of people, to be good, because this could lead to the demise of him and his people, and then he can achieve nothing. Now, this is a very powerful argument, and it's difficult for a realist to counter. Plato was all about trying to counter that very argument. Better read than dead, basically, for those of you who know that reference. That's the realist's perspective. There's nothing worse than death, because when you die, you can't accomplish anything else. Your game is over. For the idealist, there's more to the human being than our earthly lives. There's our soul, there's our character, there's the people who live on with the memory of what we did. But, that is assuming a different type of reality than the hard and fast realist is willing to admit. So there you see the clash between idealism and realism clearly. But I want to just say, the realist has a moral argument, and we need to take it seriously. The moral argument is a leader has a responsibility for all these other people. Is it morally right to put them in harm's way by insisting on following the moral rules, whether in politics or in battle? Well, Hans Morgenthau said that really leaders had a very tragic choice to make, because the tragedy of being a leader is that you don't have the luxury, he said, of being a good person, and sin is inevitable, and the soul is in danger. And this is why perhaps it's better not to be a leader of many, many people. So here we see the defense, the sort of half-hearted or tragic defense of realism. Anyway, just wanted to explore realism through Sun Tzu a bit more, and I'll try to come back and start working through the book a little bit more systematically now. Bye.